let's talk about persuasion. We are back with our small group bargaining setting. A lot of my students don't really understand what I'm talking about here, and it's actually quite simple. Most of what is happening in politics is actually done behind closed doors, and it actually is done in a group setting where negotiation and bargaining needs to go on. When politicians meet, you're not part of that meeting. You're not part of these discussions and of the negotiations that they are having. So a lot of the decisions made for us citizens are actually made behind closed doors in committee meetings or even governmental meetings, parliamentary meetings, subcommittee meetings, ad hoc committee meetings. All of these things are going on while we are not looking. And the moment you are part of a small group, or you have to hash out the details of a particular agreement, there might be conflict going on, and there is definitely a lot of stuff that you have to keep in mind in order to make these negotiations and this bargaining successful. Political issues are very tricky to reach an agreement on. I mean, we all have different ideas of how to solve different political problems. I've said it already. Employment, we can all agree that it is a problem, but how do you actually solve it? I'm telling you, the group members will have very different takes and very different ideas of how to actually do that. The beauty about the small group bargaining setting is that the political players who are part of it are usually not very concerned with their image, because they don't have to represent themselves to the media or to you. Therefore, the language that is being applied in these settings is usually less formal and can actually be quite collegial and can be quite colloquial and can be quite informal.
Exactly.
We've already found out in organizational communication that there are different strategies that you can follow if there is conflict. I don't want to say that there is always conflict in these small group bargaining settings, but definitely emotions can run rather high. And we said, according to Blake and Moten, there are 5 different ways of handling conflict. There are lose-lose strategies, there are win-lose or lose-win strategies, and there are win-win strategies. In politics, we want to go for the win-win. What does that mean? It means that you should collaborate, best case scenario, or compromise as a lesser perfect scenario, but still an acceptable scenario. So we want to concentrate on getting that win-win outcome. Whether it is a good setup or not depends on various factors. Firstly, when you are bargaining, have a look at the people who have actually come together. Are they compatible? Are they incompatible? Obviously, if you are completely incompatible in your cultural outlook, in your worldview, in your methods, then it can get rather tricky. Also, how committed are politicians to the things that they are discussing? I am sorry to always make a bad example of Donald Trump, but Donald Trump is not very committed to anybody because he actually thinks that the United States are the greatest. So if somebody approaches him and says, hey, can we trade? Or hey, can we hash something out? He is not exactly all ears, and he's not exactly very keen to do that. The third aspect that will determine how well your small group bargaining setting actually works has to do with how keen the politicians are to reach an agreement. Especially in high tension scenarios where there's maybe a war looming or a more severe conflict looming, usually the politicians want to reach an agreement. So all these factors do play a role.
Exactly.
When you're bargaining in a group or when you're bargaining between different political players, the first thing that you want to consider is that an agreement needs to be reached. And you have to understand that a non-agreement would actually be worse than an agreement. So you or your constituency would be worse off if there wasn't an agreement. Once you are on the same page with stage 1, then you can actually start to hash out the details of that agreement. And yes, it can get very heated there once again, because remember, people can usually agree on goals and have a harder time agreeing on the plans and the methods and the tactics in order to achieve these goals. So even though you might have an agreement in general, doesn't mean that you have fine-tuned, that you have worked out the details and the nitty-gritty stuff of that agreement. And during the working out of these details, once again, there might be a lot of turmoil, there might be a lot of unrest, because yes, people do use threats, they do use rewards in order to gain this acceptance. It's not always a pretty process, but remember, you want to get onto the same page after all.
Exactly.
They're finishing off this section by giving you a few tips of the trade. How do you actually induce agreement when it's a little bit tricky? Technique 1, super easy. Exploit the impatience of people. If you are being difficult and you're buying yourself time and you just keep on coming back to something, you are simply exhausting the other party. So sometimes people will go along just to put an end to the negotiations. So you could do that. It's a little bit dicey though, because you are definitely not seen in the most positive light if you're taking this particular tactic. Technique number 2 is to first offer large concessions. However, later on, you will take them back and you are pre-warning your opposition that you will do so. You could say, if we can agree now, I will give you a tax break of sorts, which is a large concession. But you will also add that if they're not going for it, you will reduce the kind of tax break that you're offering right now. So you're coming in strong, saying, hey, I want to show my goodwill, I want to show you that I want to reach an agreement, and if they are not reciprocating, then you say, okay, then let's play, and let's play hard. So you have to make it clear that the concession that you're offering will only stand for a limited period of time. And the only way the opposition will get this reward, if you want to, is if they're going for the proposed action now and not any time later.
Exactly.
I hope this podcast made it a little bit clearer what exactly the small group bargaining setting is. I know this is elusive because you don't really become part of these settings. You don't really have access to these settings, but it is a very important setting that most politicians deal with on a daily basis. That's it for today. Keep on learning.